The name of this NGO was Inspection and Control Institute.
See, if it was America, it would be the Democracy and Freedom Institute for Freedom and Democracy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Human
Happy
Reaction.
Tax Day, plebs! How long are we going to let these tyrants exploit us? Seriously. We just tax cows to be milked? The better you do, the more they chase you as you try to chase your dreams to take more from you. And to do what? What are they going to do with it? To send it to Ukraine? To put in a Ponzi scheme they call Social Security, of which it is neither social nor secure? It's neither of these things, and yet they got to tax you for it and take it out. Rather than you put it into your own retirement, it's going to pay us 50 cents on the goddamn dollar so that we can't retire. And then, lastly, they give it to a bunch of bureaucrats to make rules with the force of law, people that no one elected just so they could rule over us because we're cows. We're fucking tax cows, and it's ridiculous. Happy Tax Day.
And his name is John C.
You feel better?
A little bit, yeah.
Good. Good. Well, hey, thanks for saying what we were all thinking and feeling. Because, yeah, it's no fun.
Yeah, I'm a new small business owner. And, ouch.
Yeah.
It hurt.
Your business gets a little smaller every April 15th.
You're feeling so good. And they're just like, oh, by the way. Anyways,
yeah.
Continue.
No. I mean, I think it's a really valid conversation. At what point do we get to actually stop funding wars that we don't agree with our tax dollars?
Or bureaucrats to rule over us.
Yeah.
Right?
This was like the whole point of the revolution, right? I mean, it was over a minuscule tax on tea at that point, right? Right, Bennett?
Well, Stamp Act.
Our local Bostonite.
Yeah. There was a few.
What did Massachusetts do, Bennett?
Invented America.
Yeah.
How's that working for them now?
They got overrun by communists.
Yeah. Well, Massachusetts, we need you. We need you to defend our former glory. Well, thank you again for joining us, everybody. Human Reaction, your weekly source for independent news, commentary on cultural news and politics. It's always our mission to arm you with the tools you need to cut through media misdirection and resist the mono narrative, and to tell you exactly how we feel all the time, particularly when it pertains to taxation, which is theft, if I might just say so myself. David?
How does one apply for a religious exemption to their taxes?
Oh, that's a really good question.
What if we started a church?
Can we do that?
Why couldn't we?
I mean, if the Church of Satan can get recognized.
The Human Reaction Church?
Yes. Yes. The Taxation is Theft Church.
Anyways, I'll work on that.
I like it.
Let's workshop. Let's workshop it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let us know in the comments if you would join our church if our sacrament was not paying taxes.
Your taxes just go to us. It's a tithe.
And those of you that are members, we do appreciate you for the small fee that you pay to support our work. The tax to us. We appreciate it.
It's not tax, it's voluntary.
That's right. It is voluntary.
So here's the topics for the week. The deep state can't stop telling on itself on Tinder and Grindr dates. So we got two stories there. Very interesting news stories on the Fed and the CIA/FBI. It turns out, additionally, another story, that 15 different agencies were pitched the creation of COVID before it came out. Biggest miss on bioweapons Shark Tank history. We'll get into it. FISA, hardly know her. Huge privacy fight on the renewal of Section 702 having this week. And lastly, Elon gets takedown orders, not BBLs from Brazil.
He probably would have preferred the BBL, to be honest with you, wouldn't he?
What does BBL mean?
You don't know what a BBL is?
No.
Really? Do you know what a BBL is?
Yeah.
Bennett, do you know? How are you? I mean, I guess
I
thought you wrote the joke.
Well, I know, but I just sort of was like, Brazil's BBL. And I was like, oh.
A BBL is a Brazilian butt lift.
Oh.
It's implants in your ass.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could probably use that.
Well, he's a little thick. He could use some more in the back,
Yeah, right?
Before we workshop the BBLs for this podcast, thank you to all of our members for supporting us, for supporting those BBLs.
Kyle's going to get one with all your donor dollars.
Yeah. It's a nice cushion for the seat. Look at all of our stuff on Human Reaction Pod, all of our at humanreactionpod.com. All of our things and all of our links to everything are in the show notes below for whichever platform you're watching us on. Please like and subscribe to our channel wherever you are. Hit the notification bell if you're on YouTube. I know we just passed 900 on YouTube and like 1,200 on TikTok, and all the numbers are going up. So thank you, everybody. Wherever you guys are coming from, thank you very much for supporting us here.
They're coming from our shorts. Our shorts are spicy. And I don't mean that in the way that it might have just sounded, but I am wearing shorts today because it's summer now. But
and thongs.
And
Joe is
thongs.
wearing thongs.
Double thongs.
Bennett promised me he would mention that.
Look good in that. It'll look good with that BBL.
Thank you. I thought so. Yeah.
Just gotta get you on OnlyFans, and we'll be.
Oof.
Yeah.
You'll be getting a lot of people donating to your church.
Well, if we get to 1,000 followers, maybe, just maybe,
we start an OnlyFans.
We'll start an OnlyFans.
Wow.
Another way to just exploit the people that care about us the most.
What does that content look like? Like it's just us reading the Constitution or something? Like what does that look like?
Ooh, that's a great idea. Apparently, you can do other stuff on OnlyFans other than objectionable things.
My understanding is it started not with basically what it's come to now. Like it was supposed to be just a general subscription service, and like a lot of podcasters were jumping on OnlyFans like for like extra content for their people and stuff. But now it's become, what it is.
Yeah, no, it's funny because
Do you
actually,
remember when they stopped doing porn on OnlyFans for like a week? And then, do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
It was like last
Didn't
year.
people like freak out?
It was
They're
because
like,
everyone was
"Fine,
like, what are we
put
gonna
it back?"
Yeah,
It's like
it was
all of their revenue
That's the
went away.
entire business model.
maybe that's actually what we should do, is because this isn't very profitable yet. Maybe, but an OnlyFans would be.
But if we start a church,
Okay, so a
there's
church
two
and
ways,
an OnlyFans.
Two ways, modern man. OnlyFans or church. You could start a cult, or you could start.
I don't know.
Porn.
I don't know if Twitter's telling me anything right now. They're kind of starting to blend together.
Just a little bit of column A, a little column B.
Hey, why not? Why not?
Porn church.
But
All right, meme of the week.
also join our Discord where we talk about news, ideas, memes, and that.
And that. And you can suggest new sounds for the stream deck for Bennett to play as well.
But linking in with our first story where we're coming at right now, there was somebody put together an OPSEC training course that says, stop going on dates with this man. And it shows James O'Keefe. And it says, he wears glasses as a disguise, records conversations. He's ruining everything. He's not even gay and he won't put out. Which I think leads us to what happened with our first story, Dave.
Well, James O'Keefe had got a young woman to go on a date with an economist at the Fed, which had some very interesting stuff. Now, we'd play the video, but it's a little bit on the plane. But
We'll explain it.
And we do have a lot of stories to cover today, so we're going to go through this one pretty quick. But it is super interesting. So you remember last year when our boy Vivek was talking about the Fed's mission and how it had two parts to it. One was stable prices, lol, and then two is full employment. And he said, like, there's this false theory about inflation and employment that's obviously false, and everyone knows it's false, but it lingers on as a key mission of the Fed statutorily, right? That's what their statutory mission is. Well, it turns out on this date, when he's talking to this woman, he's obviously leaning into and probably reading her vibe about talking about Trump and about politics. He demonstrates a very political bent to the Fed, as Jerome Powell as like fighting Trump. And then additionally a very political lens on the Federal Reserve that's probably more accurate to what they're supposed to be is it's like the whole progressive, mind illusion. If you just put smart people in charge, they're just going to objectively manage society without any politics or biases.
Yeah. Well, and it's always been sort of this like overt smokescreen of like, oh, the Fed's non-political. Like they stay out of that, right? Like that counterpart might be the Treasury, right? Because they're sort of their counterpart within the administrative, apparatus. But clearly, this is demonstrating, at least from one perspective, that that's certainly not the case.
And not a non-trivial one too. Like he's not a small deal at the Fed, right? I mean, like it's not. There's a lot of people employed there. He's not like he is Jerome Powell or something like that, but he is a person of substance there. He also says that they've pretty much abandoned their mission too. They don't care about. He doesn't say anything about full employment or stable prices. What he talks about is how they are very concerned about racism and fighting for equity. Exactly the kind of equity you're thinking of, Kyle.
Yeah, no, that was when I was listening to it. He's just like, yeah, we're like, our mission is, it's about equity. And I'm just like, oh yeah, the finance term, that makes sense. Like racism. And you're like, that's not what I was thinking.
It's pervasive at this point. It's demonstrated that it's everywhere, and not just the equity DEI piece, but also he says that Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, has his legacy in mind. And what is he angling for regarding his legacy?
How good he fought Trump.
That's his number one thing.
Well, that's what this guy kind of claims. Like that his whole goal is that he's going to be the guy who doesn't bend to Trump's pressure. And there was a point, if you remember a couple years ago, way back in the Trump era, that may be coming again, but back when he was president, where he was putting pretty overt pressure, which is pretty passé, on the Fed to keep interest rates low. Or lower them at the time. They were already very low, which is crazy. Yeah. Which makes sense from Trump's point of view because he's always benefited from very cheap credit. Right?
Sure. Well, and he, like many, views the stock market doing well as a signal that the economy is healthy, which isn't necessarily the case, right?
Right. Especially with overall financialization, everything becomes a financial instrument rather than production in the economy being the signature that the economy is doing well.
Yeah.
So the question, like, what does this mean? I think is, we kind of hinted at. All of the institutions of the progressive era are falling apart. All of the illusions of it are falling apart. Everything from the FDA and the CDC being institutions that are obviously unbiased and just want to keep the food supply clean, they couldn't ever be political, to the Federal Reserve. So just looping all of these progressive institutions together, when people say all the institutions are falling apart, it's so disturbing. All of these institutions are the worst institutions in our society, right? They are the institutions that dominate us using the rule-making powers and literally a private cartel of banks that is giving a monopoly privilege to manage our money supply.
Yeah.
Their ability to do so, and then they can just change their mission wherever we want. And they don't even have to tell us. That's the crazy thing. They can just change the mission, say, we now care about this because Jerome Powell's now the guy who is in charge.
Yeah.
Absolutely absurd.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Given that it's tax day soon, why do we pay taxes if the Fed can just print money out of nowhere?
Because it's their ability to pay taxes, to pay on the debt, which is now very large. I can't remember how much of the budget it is now, but it's a lot, substantial amount of the budget. That people are relying on the buying of treasury bonds, which is what they control to control interest rates.
Explain that like I'm 5.
Oof. Have ChatGPT do that.
Okay, 10.
Retarded.
So it's the promise to pay, which is your taxes, that make people confident that treasury bonds will be worth something in the future.
And so the treasury bonds are the mechanism by which the Fed creates more dollars. They offer bonds for people to purchase, for entities to purchase, which could be foreign governments or private actors, right?
Think of it like a credit card.
And so the tax dollars are the thing on the other side. The government's saying, hey, we have these tax dollars and that's what we're going to use to pay you the interest on the bond that you're buying.
And buying bonds is essentially you're making a bet on the future of the empire. Mm-hmm. That's basically what it means.
Good luck.
Which is so funny because, and this takes me back, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but in college, I had a finance professor who was so sure that like treasury bonds would never like fail, that the government would never default. It had never defaulted. It was just the purest, most faith-worthy entity ever to exist. And I'm sitting there kind of new to the whole like Austrian economics thing and libertarianism, going like, I don't know if that's going to age very well. And I mean, that was maybe 10 years ago now. So I wonder how he's feeling about that today.
Well, they still haven't defaulted. Right.
Yeah.
But it is
Empire
eating up
rolling.
a lot of the debt.
Still doing it.
And that's how empires collapse, right? They when they can no longer pay on their debt and then they fall apart. And we do know that municipal bonds fail all the time. No, that's not fair. They've failed before. So various different counties and cities will issue municipal bonds. They'll get bought up in the marketplace. They'll say, oh, they can't fail because taxation is theft, because they can't fail because there's always more money that you can extract from. This is what this means. What it means is that they can always use more force to take more money from the productive.
Yeah.
And that's the bet at its core. The empire will continue. And the problem is that empires and municipal governments can get over their skis and go too far and, of course, collapse.
Well, and what's the quote? Like, how did you go bankrupt? Gradually and then suddenly?
Yeah.
Like, 'cause it's always like there's just things that pile up onto each other and then all of a sudden, hockey stick down. Right?
And how does that happen? I mean, you look at a state like California, right, where their tax rates are so high that they have businesses and individuals fleeing that state like rats from a sinking ship, thus slowly eroding their tax base of people that they can extract money from. And now they're even talking about trying to retroactively claw back taxes from companies and people that have left California in the last however many years. So like they're obviously fighting that battle. It seems like it's sort of a one-way street, right? Once you get on that path, it's really hard to go back.
Right. It's a ratchet effect, right? And then to unwind it is twice as hard as to wind it.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So we also have the FBI also got caught by a new organization I haven't seen before called Sound Investigations. They're poo-pooed about the guy that they actually caught on tape, but he does make some very interesting claims. The gentleman on a date... Yes, correct.
These dudes on dates all
This
the
dude
time.
on dates.
Every time.
Perhaps.
So he claims that there were at least 20 FBI agents in the crowd on October 6th. When he's kind of riffing on
January 6th.
That was October 7th, Dave.
A lot of dates.
Yeah. My bad.
So, but to the point, he's saying that there were.
Well, and we had it was the
agents.
FBI director several times since 2020 say, I can't confirm or deny. Was there this much? Was there that much? Blah, blah, blah. Basically saying, yeah, maybe, but I can't say. This says that within the agency, at least the agency employees, who was FBI and now CIA, is claiming this. Additionally to that, which I thought was actually the more interesting thing, is he claims very interestingly in the conversation, and I think a lot of people skip this, was that most of those people are now working for the CIA. And think about it.
Most of which people?
Of the people who are in the crowd during January 6th as undercover operatives.
The potential agent provocateurs.
Well, he claims that they weren't there for that, right? And he doesn't just try to defend that. He just says like, oh, they were there to try to keep it in line, right? To keep from getting out of control.
Right. Which obviously they did a terrible job of if the insurrection narrative is true.
Obviously they get a promotion for that.
Oh, clearly. Fail upwards.
Yeah, right.
Upwards.
There's also like this revolving door between the FBI and CIA that's interesting here that he kind of highlights, that this guy can kind of jump back and forth as a contractor, as a employee. And then additionally that if you were FBI and then jump over to the CIA, then you are a CIA asset. And then you're like, well, we can't reveal CIA assets. And like they're overdue important work. So therefore that can keep any kind of investigation from the House from being able to move forward, because now they have to fight not just the FBI, but also the CIA. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's a potential that that's actually the game being played, that his testimony is not the right word, but his unprovoked, like the way he talks about it probably gives a lot of credence to, because he's just riffing off, on a date.
Yeah.
As opposed to in front of a committee where he has all of his guards up and he's trying to say the PC thing.
Well, on the flip side, there are claims or, there's the perspective around this incident that he is just kind of bloviating and trying to impress his date and make himself seem more important and doesn't actually know anything. Is there substance to that
But that's the thing
argument?
is, he's not talking about what he's done. He's talking about what's going on at his agency. Right? Like there's
So it's not like he's trying to like inflate himself.
Yeah.
Although he could be inflating himself saying, oh, I know all these things. I have access to this information.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And he does kind of, he suggests, for example, like the FBI was one, and maybe the CIA encouraged the Sandy Hook victims to sue Alex Jones.
Oh, yep. He was
Right?
talking about
Which
that.
is an interesting, like, is that a violation of the CIA's charter? Because it's,
Well,
now, they themselves aren't going after a U.S. citizen, but they're encouraging a U.S. citizen to go after him. Isn't that a violation
well,
of the
and
CIA?
he said they tiptoe around that, right? Like they don't encourage, but they nudge, or whatever the word was that he used. Which, right? I mean, that's just the same thing. But
Yeah.
and they would say, oh well, like there's this thing that the intelligence agencies are doing, but we can't do this, but you could do that. They're
Right.
just like sort of advising, saying like this is an avenue that you could pursue. Wink, wink.
Right. And there's also interesting. This was probably recorded before the New York Times came out with that article that we spent a bunch of time criticizing a little while ago about the CIA's operations in Ukraine. There was like that puff piece. I don't know if you guys remember that. Well, I assume this was recorded before that, because he mentions like it's completely like secret information that the CIA was in Ukraine. Right. And like that it's a CIA operation. That itself is another interesting layer of this that kind of suggests that he is telling the truth. Like he's talking about things that are true from his perspective.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like it could be manipulated in some sense. Like he could be exaggerating, but it's hard to imagine. I mean, these all seem things that seem reasonably within the purview of what the intelligence agency.
Well, and I mean they comport with like our own experience.
Well, it's not like he's saying the CIA shot JFK with a magic bullet, right?
Sure.
Like, or something outlandish.
But he is saying like it was our mission to bankrupt Alex Jones,
Yes.
which they obviously did with like however many hundreds of millions of dollars he now has to pay to the Sandy Hook victims, or whatever the settlement there. So it's like these are things that are substantiated by the outcomes of events that we know to be true.
Well, and there's also an element too here of like, I think in America and the empire in general, we're really good at kind of masking that this is the way that things work. Like we kind of like dress it up with a lot of fancy language, but then, and this will be a theme that we revisit when we hit the Elon versus Brazil story. But when you go to these other countries, a lot of this type of stuff is just a lot more naked and out there, and we just see it. It's just in America, we kind of like hide it, and we have these systems that obfuscate it, right?
Well, we want to pretend that, we're so much better and that would never happen here.
Yeah, we've evolved.
We're a democracy or whatever, right?
We're so beyond that.
We're so beyond that.
It's the
like,
shibboleth.
We would never do these things, even though we like just did them 5 years ago. It's like we've evolved past that.
Yeah.
Right?
I wish you weren't a liar.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com. This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up Promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link.
So what else evolved was COVID-19. Oh, we're going to get our video flag now. I said the word. Schmobit schmit schmeen.
Oh, don't.
Okay, so
I'm gonna ban you from this space. If
as
do
you
that.
all might remember, since 2020, there's been this, the Proximal Origins of COVID-19 paper that came out. Do you guys remember this? Had all these folks who are all epidemiologists and virologists all come out and say, hey, it probably wasn't a lab link. Actually, it's not possible the virus came from a lab link.
Yeah, there couldn't be more preposterous thesis than that.
Right. So this is the classic. The wiki page actually does a pretty good job summarizing it, basically saying that it probably wasn't a product of bioengineering. Then FOIA really leaks came out, and various different other things came out and said, well, there might be some conflicts of interest here. That some of these people that wrote on this paper were actually, found to be, either linked to gain of function research, or actually a teleconference came out that said Fauci was out there saying, hey, don't spike this story. Make sure you say strongly that it couldn't be from this.
Well, there were emails to substantiate that as well.
Yeah, but you actually have Fauci's voice on, you can find saying it. So 2021, after all that, there's still pressure on coming back on this question of when did the agencies know and when they didn't know. So the background to what happened this week was what happened in 2021 beyond that, which is a DARPA lieutenant colonel whistleblower released that the EcoHealth Alliance came to DARPA with a proposal to take a coronavirus and make it infectious to humans. DARPA said,
nope.
That sounds crazy and dangerous.
What is it?
DARPA is like an advanced research.
The Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. I think.
So they're there to make like the next generation of tools for fighting.
Yeah.
So they were like,
they're working on crazy out there stuff.
You want to take one of the most deadly diseases in animals and make it infectious for humans. That's crazy. No.
Yeah.
Right. And so he came out with that whistleblower content, and everyone found out that, no, wait, at least DARPA knew about it. So then Rand Paul, who is doing yeoman's work on this ever since his battles with Fauci in 2020, he came out with an op-ed this week saying, because of his research on this, he discovered that 15 federal agencies knew in 2018 about the Wuhan Institute of Virology was trying to create a coronavirus-like COVID-19.
In 2018.
2018.
2 years.
Yes, this is EcoHealth
before.
Alliance co-authoring with the WIV, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So the officials knew that the Chinese lab was proposing to create a COVID-19-like virus, and none of these officials revealed the scheme to the public in 2020 or since then. So get this. They go around like Shark Tank, and they're like, hey guys, want to create a bioweapon? So that we can prevent the next leap over from animals to, like, EcoHealth Alliance, they got a very, very peculiar, like, whole thing. The thing is, like, as humans progress into nature, there's going to be more conflict between humans and nature.
Okay. Go on.
That is the dumbest theory but anyways.
Turn the friggin' frogs gay.
He's got
And
a point.
that's going to create more viruses leaping from nature to humans than there were before.
Okay.
Let me be absolutely clear about that. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Here's why. We used to live with animals. The most common practice of most Europeans was actually to live in the same house as your pig, because your pig ate your shit.
That is no way
And
to
then you
refer-
ate your pig in the springtime. You would raise a pig through the wintertime, eating your poop and other things and waste, and then you eat it in the springtime.
That sounds good. I'll have that.
Right. Well, that's when more animal-human interactions happen. Not now. In fact, most humans have less interaction with animals now. Duh. Like wild animals especially.
Yeah.
I mean, like, anyways. So
well, hold on.
EcoHealth
Hold on.
Alliance makes this pitch that they're going to prevent the next pandemic by doing this thing of playing with making this coronavirus have an ability to infect humans so that they can get ahead and do the next thing that nature's going to do, right? To keep the next swine flu from happening, for example. From bats, though.
This may be a dumb question, but, so yes, humans used to live more in proximity to livestock and that sort of thing. A lot more humans used to be, used to raise animals than do now, but we live in a very sanitized society. So because we've kind of had that arc away from that
Immune system.
has there been a change in the immune system and like the interface of those sorts of components?
Maybe.
I mean, is there some logic to this?
Well, maybe,
Just
but
trying to
look
steel
at the
man it.
vectors, right? So what makes this is just me using the knowledge I know about evolutionary biology and virology. It's not systematic, right? So, but just think about it. If you have narrow vectors, meaning only a 1% of the population ever deals with a wild animal or a farm animal on a regular basis, that means far less people are going to have the opportunity for that leap to happen.
True.
And what you want for the leap to happen is a maximal amount of people interfacing with animals, because it's very rare for the leap to happen because evolution has pressured the animal viruses to specialize for animals, not for humans.
Yep.
Right. And that's why the leap doesn't necessarily happen in the first place. So no, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like still, like it, even if when it happens, it wouldn't that, well, okay. In every example we have is that it doesn't go anywhere specifically because the translation doesn't work well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So like swine flu from the early 2000s didn't get very big or go very far, in part because it just wasn't an effective virus for humans because it made a leap from pigs to humans.
Yeah.
Right. So this is
really-
the interesting thing about COVID, right? Because at first they were like, oh, this is not a big deal. It's probably going to be like swine flu. Remember way back in January of 2020, at the very first reaction was this isn't going to be a big deal. And then probably when they discovered that it came from Wuhan, they all freak out, because the thing is that if it's
I'm freaking out, man.
that's a good one. Yeah. They all freak out because it was likely that they discovered, oh man, this might have come from Wuhan, the lab. So it might be bioengineered. If it's bioengineered to do this, then it might retain its deadliness from animals while becoming as infectious as a human as it is in animals.
Sure.
Well, and then because there were people reporting on this, like you had Zero Hedge, and I remember people like Balaji Srinivasan was talking about this back in like 2019. It was before even the January stuff, just when the initial China stuff was kind of coming up, like because that was like that all started happening in like the fall of 2019. And Zero Hedge got banned from Twitter when they were reporting on the Wuhan lab leak idea
Theory,
because there was like scientists that were suiciding themselves and all this stuff that was going on too. So like there was information that existed and people were putting these pieces together, and then it was just like, nope, banned from everything. And story can't happen. And then it's like 2 years later where then Jon Stewart is able to go on the Daily or on the Colbert Report and make jokes about it. It's like, now we can talk about it. It's like now it's okay to say these things. But for 2 years it wasn't.
Well, and that's a like public shaming thing. Like, you can't talk about it now because we're in the middle of the fight. Like, you're going to keep us from being united against the enemy as opposed to using reason, right?
Yeah.
So
And if you really want to be blackpilled on this too, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, but the Tucker's interview with Michael Nels was really illuminating around all this stuff. And the trickle down effects on like the mind, the ability to reason and think, and your propensity to be influenced by fear, and like all the things around COVID and the spike protein, the decisions that were made around this stuff. Really, really fascinating interview, but not terribly like bright, I would say, in terms of feeling good about the situation.
But it wasn't a white pill, but that's the thing, is like what we're discovering now is the absolute cowardice of 15 federal agencies who could have came out and said, hey, for the benefit of the public, these so-called servants of us never came out and said, hey, they pitched us on this back in 2018. And EcoHealth Alliance has something to account for, because this looks like a heck of a lot of exactly what they pitch us on. You look at the actual proposal. You want to bring it up real quick? It actually has freaking bats on the front of it. I think you got it on the tab here. It's very interesting, right? Because it's like,
yeah.
This is leaked from DARPA, right?
Project Diffuse, diffusing the threat of bat-borne coronaviruses.
Yeah, so that was what they were pitching to all these different agencies. They were going around saying, hey, do you want to jump in on Project Diffuse? Just give us all this money. Wow. Including Dr. Anthony Fauci, who in 2018 was running the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. And his quote was not only briefed on the Wuhan's desire to create this virus, NIAID was actually listed as a participant in the initial diffuse pitch. Fauci's Rocky Mountain Lab in Colorado was named a partner alongside the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the proposal. Now, what isn't clear so far, based upon the read I've done so far, is where this research for the Diffuse project was meant to have. Because you go to EcoHealth Alliance's response, they say, we never got funding. So this is all a big red herring because we never actually got this money. We would have done it. It's like a very OJ thing. We would have done it.
But we didn't do it
because you never gave us the money. Very strange defense. So what the Diffuse project itself was, is exactly what, real quick. It was take a chimera,
which is
an animal with human characteristics, that you specifically manipulate to have human characteristics, train coronaviruses to be able to infect them, and then use that to develop a vaccine so that if it ever happened in the wild, you would have a vaccine immediately.
So create a mythical crossbreed creature
that doesn't exist.
To breed a virus that doesn't yet exist,
which we've been doing
to produce a vaccine for the thing that you didn't need before you created the mythical creature that didn't exist.
Yeah. What's especially funny is that they were doing this in order to get ahead of nature, right? To have the vaccine before. That's the pitch, right? We want to be ready for nature before it can get us flat-footed.
Is it just me, or does it seem like a God complex?
Well, yeah, but it's also like it's actually a defense industry mindset. That's the crazy thing. EcoHealth Alliance gets an insane amount of money from the military industry, from the Pentagon, $40 million in funding. EcoHealth Alliance was just like a family endowment that turned into this thing that is now all about the front line of human and animal interactions and viruses that can come from it. And the total amount of federal dollars it gets is $109 million. So, like, to remind you, EcoHealth Alliance, they are a group that they go around, they pitch all this stuff around. They make the case for getting ahead of the biology. And then ironically, the very thing that they pitch for is the thing that happens to us. And then we have to create a vaccine, and then we have the vaccine response. Very curious about that.
Very peculiar coincidence.
Yeah. But what isn't clear...
Stop noticing things.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
I'm just asking questions.
They can't ask questions.
You're not allowed to do that anymore, Joe.
So they were the ones who had their contract suspended because the Trump administration wanted them to, quote, hand over information materials from the Chinese Wuhan Institute of Virology research facility to resume funding for the suspended grant. So they had a grant. It got suspended if they handed over that information. They never did. And then right as Fauci's about to leave the
NIAID.
Well, no, where he was at during COVID, which was not at NIAID anymore. It was at the CDC or NIH.
NIH.
The NIH.
I think, right, yeah.
Right before he leaves, he takes their $4 million, of which they had already spent most of it. They only had like $300,000 left of that grant. He gives them a new $7 million grant right before he leaves. Because of a uproar of 77 U.S. Nobel laureates and 31 scientific societies lobbying for a EcoHealth Alliance to get $7 million new. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then additionally to that, the prior reporting to this one, which is interesting because it's not that long ago, was saying that it was all a ruse, right? The American scientists misled Pentagon on research of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Basically, they said, we're going to conduct this research at UNC or at the Colorado Rocky Mountain Institute. But it was actually done in Wuhan, right? Because it has less controls. American biolabs have very firm controls and they're much more expensive to run.
Well, and under the Obama administration, didn't he kind of put a stop to gain of function research in the U.S. and that's when everything went to China?
I'm not sure about that.
I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
that that's the case.
That sounds correct to me.
Internet, fact check me.
Yeah.
No,
China.
that could be the thing. I just might have missed it. So lastly there, David Morans, which is Fauci's right-hand man at the NIH, was using his private email for work, right? For example, and put on administrative leave, probably because, and is still unknown if he was ever fired for it. This is another revelation that Rand Paul came out with this week. So, for example, they've caught people at NIH like doing things that are supposedly illegal, and they still can't confirm whether or not these people lost their jobs or what. If they're on paid administrative leave or whatever. So like the administration itself is not being forthcoming about when these various things are happening. Every step of the way they have to be coerced into releasing more information.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I mean, just like couldn't be more corrupt through and through the whole experience.
Yeah. One more thing. One of the people on the pitch deck from EcoHealth Alliance was Ian Lipkin, who was one of the lead guys on the Proximal Origins paper.
Huh.
So get this. In 2018, this cat is writing a pitch deck about how great it would be to create a coronavirus that's effective for humans in 2018. And by 2020, he's saying, it couldn't have come from a lab. I don't know what you're talking about. There's just no possible way. It's not what it is.
Let's just
I
get
wish you
Mark.
weren't a liar.
Let's just get Mark Cuban in here and Mr. Wonderful. Like just put forward a little Shark Tank. And
Oh man. Let's do it.
So that's the question. Now, the only complicating factor remaining that still isn't clear to me is was Project Diffuse ever funded? That seems like it should be something you can look up. You can find all the numbers I said for all the money they've gotten from the State Department. None of it's clearly for Project Diffuse.
But I mean,
or if they got to fund it some other way.
There's the thing is like, well, just because Project Diffuse didn't get funded doesn't mean they didn't just rebrand it and pitch it to a different agency or bring it from a different angle or
it's black budget.
Right. I mean, how much money does the Pentagon not account for? What, the $6 trillion now?
All of it.
All of it. Enough to fund some weird stuff behind closed
There's
doors.
some creative accounting that goes into. There's like, oh yeah, here's like, yeah, that toilet's definitely $50,000.
Yeah.
Like
Too bad all the documents around that were in the World Trade Center. I'm just asking questions.
Stop your noticing,
Stop
Joe.
noticing things, Joe.
I love this new meme. It's a great new world.
I learned this week that we're not allowed to ask questions anymore.
Yeah.
So stop asking questions.
Thanks, Ben.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's ZESTYBEV.com.
All right. So we've
FISA.
gone a long time without reacting to anything. So let's just start out with that on the FISA hardly knower.
Well, yeah.
Okay, hold on. If you're gonna do it, you got to do it with the Boston
Pfizer.
accent. FISA.
Yeah, you
Pfizer.
got
How'd we know?
That was New York. Don't
Whatever.
smear my people.
They're all the same to me, Bennett.
Just some big mass of people out east.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
Big mass.
do we want to start off with just a little bit of a little bit of pop culture around the Snowden thing? Is
Yeah,
that
a
what
little
we're talking about?
context. Yeah. What is a FISA warrant? FISA. What's a FISA?
So this is from the Snowden docudrama.
Which is great, and you should all see it.
I've actually never watched it. I watched like the actual Snowden documentary. I never watched this
Oh,
one
it was
quite
great.
excellent.
with what's his name
It
playing
was
Snowden.
really good.
If you ever get a
What's his
girlfriend,
name?
you want to get her
That
woke.
guy.
That guy.
Who was in what again? Inception.
And
Batman?
Batman.
And
Batman.
Yeah.
That guy.
I don't
Yeah.
think he's in Inception.
He's
Oh,
totally
totally.
in
I was
Inception.
thinking of Interstellar. Never mind.
What's that guy's name again?
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Yeah,
That's the one. That's
that
him.
guy. I love that guy. I just always forget his name. Like,
Yeah.
I love his acting.
I keep wanting to say. I keep wanting to say Jonathan Taylor Thomas only because he also has 3 names, but they're not the same person.
These
not a
3
suit.
named
Allegedly.
actors.
Yeah. Sons of
All right, yeah. So here's a little clip from that movie.
Janine, how did the White House conversation go?
I made it quite clear that we were in possession of an authentic FISA court order. They wanted to see it. We refused. Now I just pray that it's actually authentic.
Are you actually questioning that?
That's actually Glenn
No
Greenwald.
one has ever seen a FISA court order. There's no precedent here.
Our source risked his life for that document. It's real.
Oh,
Tell us,
wasn't looking.
did the White House make any specific claims about national security that would prevent you from publishing?
No. I asked them repeatedly, and they had no substantive answer.
Then there you go. What more do you want? You can go out and know that you're safe.
Glenn, I'd like to talk to Alan before we go any further.
When does he land?
In 6 hours.
No, absolutely not. We're sitting ducks here, Janine. No, it's 1 p.m. in New York. If you don't get this out in the next 4 hours, you'll miss the evening news on the East Coast.
But we can post later tonight. I'm sorry, Glenn, but Alan's our editor-in-chief, and I really think that
The
I
government
have to...
knows that we have these documents now. The CIA could barge through this door any minute and you want more time. Act like a journalist and stop stringing us along.
God, so intense.
Yeah. Now you're paying attention though.
Oh yeah.
So this is what this is about. Did you notice at the very beginning when it said no one's ever seen a FISA court order before?
Yeah. Explain that.
So FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, a response to the Nixon break-in scandal, right, of the Watergate. It established a procedure. It's a series of reforms to things that were kind of going on or things that were kind of opening up with the revelation previously during the Church Committee of things that existed, such as the NSA. Now, remember this. For decades, the NSA existed and we didn't know.
Yeah.
We had to discover them on accident because along with all the other things that the CIA and the various intelligence agencies were doing during the 1960s, we found out through the Church Committee. So there was like, oh, this is now a public issue. And then by 1978, there was a reform isn't exactly the right word, but basically a clarification that the foreign intelligence, we're talking about a CIA, NSA, did obey certain rules when it came to surveilling individuals that were American and people overseas. Section 702 specifically lays out that if it's a foreigner, you don't need a warrant. And if it's a American, you need a warrant, but that a warrant goes to a secret court called a FISA court or FISC.
Seems legit.
A FISC. That secret court then reviews and then approves whether or not you can do that. So this week, every 5 years that comes up for reauthorization. This week, there was a reauthorization that came up. And usually in a legislative situation on the House, you vote on the rules for a bill and then you vote on the bill. So you say, this bill is going to have these different characteristics how much we're going to debate. Are we going to offer amendments? How many amendments? All that kind of stuff. And then this. Well, the rules vote failed by 19 Republicans for various different reasons, right? And it doesn't split evenly, but a lot of the Freedom Caucus people who were voted against it, specifically because this bill, from their point of view, came up from the Intelligence Committee, which is almost wholly owned by the intelligence community. So the intelligence committee is owned by the intelligence community in the sense that, do you remember the guy who said, hey, we have to pass Ukraine funding because there's a secret weapon out there? We reported on it.
Yes.
We were like, it might be a space nuke or something like that.
Yes.
That's the sort of guy we're talking about. He's the guy who runs the intelligence committee.
And so he's getting all of his quote unquote information fed to him from someone at the intelligence services.
Who's he's in this case?
The guy who said there's a secret weapon out there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and to the degree that he's going to skiffs and like in dialogue with them, sure, yeah.
So when you say they're wholly owned, like the intelligence committee is wholly owned by the intelligence services, what does that look like?
They're just really tight, right? These people are all in that committee because they all believe in the power and mission of the foreign intelligence people.
Gotcha.
The Judiciary Committee has a very different set of priorities, right? So the Judiciary Committee is like worried about the Fourth Amendment implications of what's happened, and what we've seen is the implementation of 702. So if you talk to people from the intelligence community or people who are proxies for them, Dan Crenshaw, for example, right? Those folks will say 702 means you can't spy on Americans. And we have a process for spying on Americans when they're a terrorist, right? So as American, and he got online, he saw some jihadi videos. Now he's a member of Hamas and he might attack a synagogue, right? We need to know about and spy on that person. Okay, fine. That's what the FBI's job is to keep that from happening or intercept them before they can do that, right? So the question they are making that case, but the implementation of what's actually going on with Section 702 and the NSA and the FBI is much more complicated. So let's go into the CNN coverage, and this will kind of maybe tease out some of the dynamics that I'm talking about here.
We begin with the latest demand from former President Donald Trump to House Republicans, quote, kill FISA. FBI Director Christopher Wray is expected to deliver a sobering response to Trump's decree. This is no time to mess around with the law known as FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, amid the turmoil in the Middle East and following an ISIS attack in Russia that could inspire acts of terrorism here on U.S. soil. The law allows the U.S. to collect the communications of non-Americans overseas. It's up for reauthorization as it's due to expire next week. But the continuing chaos up on Capitol Hill.
So you got a lot of the Freedom Caucus here. You got Loan Boebert, you got Matt Gaetz, Matt Rosendale,
Anna Paulina Luna,
Andy Ogles, all those guys, right? And there's some other people who are a little bit more on the out of that, but yeah, broadly that's who's pushing back here.
The typical troublemakers.
What you don't see here is like Thomas Massey for a various different set of like tactical reasons, although he also wants the reform. This is a tactical angle that these guys took to try to get reforms to it. Chip Roy is a big example of that.
Thomas Massey's trying to get an amendment slipped through, right?
So here's the way to understand the tactics. You have one tactic, which is introduce rules, vote on those rules, vote on amendments, add the Warren requirements as an amendment, and then see how that vote happens. And even if it fails, at least you got to vote on the amendments. That's not what happened. That was like Thomas Massey's faction. The other faction, the Freedom Caucus faction, otherwise said, reject the rules, which is what happened. They temporarily failed to reauthorize FISA, which is what happened. And then you can hope that the future FISA bill includes in concessions and warrants, right? Because basically one says like, hopefully we'll be able to take the momentum that the speaker's doing and add in. And the other one says, no, we're going to stop him. And then we're going to try to hold firm on that across any other future bills to try to pressure him in order to get it. Either one's, I think, a viable tactic.
Yeah. Forgive me if I missed it, but like, is there a specific end goal they're trying to accomplish here? Is it like getting rid of this or like changing rules? Like what exactly are they trying to accomplish?
It's hashtag get a warrant, right? It says if it's an American that you are spying on, you have to get a warrant always.
Yeah, it can't just be the secret court.
So it has to be a warrant from a judge that's not a part of the...
It's still a FISA warrant. It's just that they don't need to get a warrant in a bunch of circumstances despite the language. You have the language of the law, the fact de jure, and then you have the fact de facto, right? What they actually do. And what they do is various different ways to get around the laws. Now, none of these guys are actually advocating what I would advocate for, which is you completely eliminate the secret court, right? Because secret courts are a contradiction. They're absolutely ridiculous in concept, right? Because you have none of the checks that actually work in courts. We can unpack that in a minute. Come back around to it if you want to know my opinion on that.
Well, yeah, that's actually what I meant. Yeah, not getting rid of the secret court, but you're getting rid of the kind of the process, which is just like they can just do what they want.
Right. Well, so let's circle on that. Let's make sure we get all the way through this, because I want to try to capture some of this dialogue about how Trump plays into this, and then the response as summarized that we just heard from the former FBI director. So Trump came in and he, not at the 11th hour, but on the day of the vote or the day before the vote, said, "Kill FISA. It was illegally used against me and many others. They spied on my campaign."
You didn't put the energy into it. It's in all caps with 5 exclamation points.
Kill FISA!
Kill FISA. It was illegally used against me and many others. They spied on my campaign. Signed, DJT.
We're looking into it. Everyone knows it.
Well, which he's not wrong about. There was definitely a member of the Trump campaign that we definitely know they spied about, and then leaked to the press.
Wow.
The Trump is all in the hands. Like it probably didn't get shown on the camera, but I'm doing this I was doing a one-handed Trump hand motion.
It's all about it. You gotta stretch it apart. You gotta stretch it apart, and then do this part, right?
So,
well, hold on. I think I just want to, illuminate this other side of it, which there's probably a contingent of Americans who are like, good. They should have spied on Trump because he's public enemy number 1. So I actually like the FISA thing.
He's literally Hitler.
Yeah. So,
would you not use FISA to stop Hitler?
So let's tease that apart. Why is that, not an opinion that should be held by people, even if they do think Trump is the scum of the earth or whatever?
Because he's an American citizen, he has a right to privacy.
But
by the Fourth Amendment,
that's your moral framework, Dave. Yeah, Trump is literally Satan himself coming to destroy America.
You can't oppress me with your colonialist
for a second,
rhetoric.
2 times.
Yeah, I mean,
more than anyone else, both times.
Now there are 2 of them.
Dude, where are these all coming from?
Man, you have been working on
I
this.
just love how you're just invested in that now. I'm totally lost. What are we talking about?
Okay,
why?
Well, so what Joe's kind of trying to peel back here is you have your moral framework right here of this is bad to do to an American citizen. But Joe's saying there is a large swath of Americans where that is not necessarily their moral framework. Their moral framework is good. This is great. We should use it to actually take out the bad guys like Hitler, Donald Trump himself, Mr. Satan.
The ends justify the means kind of people.
Yeah, and that's the problem. When the ends justify the means, you can justify anything.
Like what?
You have no principle.
Well,
like gas chambers, right? If the problem is if the ends justify the means, there is no limiting principle by the nature of you have. That's the problem with consequentialism as a moral guide. It can be a guide for many things, but it can't be a moral guide.
So you're saying I actually, if that's my view, I actually have to have principles?
That's the benefit of principles, right? Benefit principles. Okay, so because the world is limited by nature, right? You have to have a constrained vision. And principles allow you to constrain yourself by embracing a model that you then have to comply with if you're going to be consistent, right? But if you just reject consistency, if you just reject everything and just say, no, it's all about power and ends justify the means and anything I need that gets me what I need is the good thing, well, then how do you tell the difference between when you are the good guy and when you're the monster, right? You become the very thing that you're trying to defeat. So that is the benefit of deontology or principle-based thinking.
Okay.
That's my philosophic answer.
I was
probably not the right one. Tell me why I'm wrong, Kyle.
Well,
it's actually just a battle
I
for
think
power.
I think where I think, because I'm a very Nietzschean person in this, there's just a very different moral framework that exists here. You're operating off of a very liberty-oriented moral framework and a very particular view of the state. These people don't have those view of the state. So it's not even necessarily that they're ends justify the means. They just have an entire moral their starting point is at a completely different starting point. So there is definitely the ends justify the means people where it's just it just doesn't matter as long as we get the power, blah, blah, blah. But there's also a lot of the people that are in the cult of they're in a different cult than you. They just have an entirely different baseline. So they're fine operating, in that baseline.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I think that baseline, even for those people,
I agree. Their baseline is wrong.
isn't deontological, right? It's ends justify the means, right? It's whatever keeps the next Hitler from rising, right? As if you would know who that is, right? There's a hubris to that idea that you would know what that is, but when you saw it, and you would be able to exercise violence or manipulation or lies to do the right thing in that. And you're probably not. You're probably the prison guard, not the guy who actually stood up at that time. Right. And if you can actually embrace that humility, you might actually generate for yourself some general applied rules about when you should manipulate, when you should lie, when you should commit violence, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, what's the logical end state of that sort of line of thinking? I mean, is it like it's thought crime, it's
a perpetual
Minority
war for power.
Report?
It's
because if you're trying to stop someone from doing something before they've done it, before, right? Like that's really like where you're talking about going.
Well, and it's very specifically like you catastrophize someone into being a Nazi, and then you can't ever work with them. So then the entire government locks up into perpetual warfare.
Which feels like where we are right now.
Yeah, right. It was where we've been for a long time, right? But it's there because of the catastrophification of people who just cannot come to the table and actually debate these issues straight up.
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
They have to turn everybody into a terrorist, right? So then you have no reason to ever actually talk about the principles and what we're actually shooting for and debate them, right? It's just, they're just dumb, greedy, capitalist monster Republicans, or they're just communistic, statists, right?
Well, and you see this in all these other countries too. Like if you look at El Salvador, Argentina, Brazil, all these places, it's always there's a necessity of like there's a certain way things are going, and there's this backlash that's happening to the corruption in these countries. We have to stamp out right-wing populism because they're going to overthrow the country and all the it's the same playbook over and over and over again, right? Because there's a certain system of control that exists, and eventually those systems of control are starting to get overbloated with the corruption, and the regular people are starting to feel the downstream effects of that corruption. And everybody's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this anymore. Hey, we're really mad. Why is there all this money laundering going on over there? Why is this all happening? Why is all these gangs, and those gangs are tied up with the government? And everybody just starts being like, whoa, what's going on? And then there's these figures that come up that's just like, lock them up, right? Lock up the bad actors. And that happens in all of these, and Trump was honestly a big beginning of that. Lock her up. Remember all the chants? Because everybody's looking at Hillary Clinton and all the corruption that was going on with the Clinton Foundation and all this stuff, right? So like this is the kind of natural outflowing that ends up happening.
Yeah. And the real problem is that once you boil things out of like, we're no longer a republic, we're no longer, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that we're not, we are no longer the same country. We're actually two different countries fighting a Cold War over who gets to control it. Then your only calculation is power, which is justify the means, right? Both sides go from, we're going to talk about principles, we're going to talk about perspective, and we're going to mutually respect and work with each other to try to come up with the best solution. Instead, it is our entire aim is to troll the libs, destroy the libs, or to troll and destroy the right? And that's all that there is. Once you get there, the steps, the escalation ladder to civil war and to terrible things are all just there. There's no limiting principle why not to go there. Right? Why not go there? Why not spy on his campaign? Because he's the end of the republic, right? And now Republicans can say exactly the same thing about Joe Biden. Why not do him? Because he spied on us and he censored us in the deep state that he's a part of, which is, the lines are pretty clear in the FISA fight, for example, that Joe Biden and Speaker Johnson are now on the same side on this, side of the intelligence community, specifically the same people who said you can't even click on the link to the Biden laptop story are now saying they need to be able to spy on you without the check for a warrant.
Let's talk about that a little bit too. Can we illuminate a bit about this pivot that Mike Johnson has taken on this issue? Because it seemed like when he came in, he was supported by the Freedom Caucus. Mm-hmm. Now he's completely flipped to the other side of this debate where he's on the other side of the Freedom Caucus on this issue. Right. How did that happen?
He'll tell us right here.
I have a video of him flipping right here. Yeah.
When I was a member of the judiciary, I saw all the abuses of the FBI, the terrible abuses over and over and over, the hundreds of thousands of abuses. And then when I became speaker, I went to the SCIF and got the confidential briefing from sort of the other perspective on that to understand the necessity of Section 702 of FISA and how important it is for national security. And it gave me a different perspective. So I encourage all the members to go to the classified briefing and hear all that and see it so they can evaluate the situation for themselves. And I think some opinions have changed both ways, but that's part of the process. You got to be fully informed.
I do find it funny. It's like, I had an opinion. Then they took me into a private room and they showed me some stuff, and now I have a different opinion. It's pretty funny.
They put some clamps on my nipples, and now I feel differently.
What'd they say in the room, Mike? What did they say?
It's just like, I had a certain opinion. Then they took me into the SCIF and they showed me pictures of me diddling those kids, and now I have a different opinion.
Jesus.
Yikes.
But
I'm not saying that happened. It's just that's where my mind went.
Is it blackmail?
You can't watch that and not feel like yes.
Well, you have
funny.
Black box. Just listen to what he said. Listen to what he said. Hundreds of thousands of FBI abuses. And they gave me some anecdotes one time in a dark room. How do you justify that? How do you justify that on scale? You're like, wait a minute. You tell me there's nothing we can do? So one of the things here that he's actually playing into, and to be fair, is that the authors of the bill that he supports, the renewal that the Freedom Caucus opposed, has, quote, 53 reforms, right? The 53 reforms dramatically expand Section 702 by including new definition of electronic communication service provider. Probably, in my opinion, I haven't seen anyone say this yet, but I think that has to do with including Starlink in this, that otherwise might not be definitionally true.
Starlink's playing a big role in a lot of things right now.
It is very interesting. So Section 702, the statutory definition of electronic service, ECSP, electronic community service provider, is one, a telecommunications carrier, which would be Starlink, right? But
sure.
Yeah. Two, a provider of electronic communications service or remote computing service as defined by Electronic Communication Privacy Act. Three, this is the new one. Any communication service provider who has access to wire or electronic communications, either as communications are transmitted or as communications are stored. Right. So it says, it basically is trying to broaden out the potential capture of anything that they can grab to be able to move into. And with that, I'm specifically thinking of Snowden, the Project Stellar Wind, and the different sorts of mass grabbing of data so that they can then query the data afterwards. And that's how they get around Section 702 warrant requirements. Okay. So they say...
This is about to get left brain. Everybody buckle up.
So what they say, you are somewhat connected to a U.S. service provider and kind of in the nexus of U.S. service provider and a foreign agent, right? And so we can gather any information from that U.S. service provider and that foreign agent within 3 steps of them. Right?
So what does a step look like?
My brother has a friend who's dating somebody who's Pakistani.
Oh, wow. So
That's 3 steps.
because of that, they can trace your communications.
Yes. And if that person is, suspected as being a Pakistani, that's from Ars Technica and was reported through Snowden. Now, the other ones of this, it also expands pretty much be any company that has any foreign relations whatsoever. A foreigner who's an employee, an investor, a customer. If you're a Starbucks, you're surveilled right at that point, right? Because Starbucks has Starbucks in other countries. So therefore, all Starbucks communications now available. Now, what's interesting is that the left came out with a bunch of criticisms of this before it really went mainstream about saying, oh, well, Starbucks example, or landlords, right? Your landlords might have a business overseas. So that makes your Wi-Fi hosted by your landlord now subject to surveillance, right? Because that's just that company. Now all their data can be sucked up into Stellar Wind. Now the last part of that, so that obviously grossly expands it. And then they said, no, it doesn't. You're just being scaremongering. And then they came out with a new bill last night that said, oh, we're going to accept food service providers and landlords. So, but if Oracle, which is one of the largest database holders in the world, also has overseas investments or overseas employees or overseas, that means all of Oracle's data or all of any of the major companies' data, Microsoft, etc.
I mean, this just seems like completely the opposite of what reforms would look like to someone who actually wanted to roll this back. But they're reforms so they can say we're reforming it, but it's actually just making it worse.
Right. So like one of the reforms is it specifically says now if they're spying on a congressman, they have to tell the congressman.
Okay. Hey, bud, we're spying on you. Thought you should know.
Just so they can fly with the law. You don't get that right.
Nothing you can do about it.
You don't get that right, but a congressman does.
Well,
it's special.
It reminds me of
they're the pigs are more equal.
That might cause some people to vote for it. Think about that for a moment. Just think about it.
It reminds me of remember when Tucker, when he was still at Fox, was saying that the NSA was spying on him.
Yeah,
and it was like a whistleblower that came to him that said like, "Hey, yeah, they know about your trip to Russia, right?" It just reminds me of that, where you're like, they get the special privileges, but then like Tucker had to get somebody leaking the information to him that they were, and then also that just straight up telling him like, "No, you can't go to Russia, bro."
Yeah,
right.
Well, and I mean, and that's somebody who is at the pinnacle of his industry, right? Of media. Someone like you who just like unceremoniously got banned from everything when that happened. You don't have the luxury of having a whistleblower come and tell you, hey, they're monitoring you.
I had anonymous accounts that got banned that weren't even linked to my name. Right. Like that's weird.
Makes me feel nervous even being around you. I feel like we're about to get drone struck right now or something. But I mean, this is a real problem because someone can be a target without even really knowing they're a target. You can just, if you hold the wrong view of the day, doesn't even have to be, you don't have to have a track record of being some sort of dissident or foreign operative or anything that you would think, okay, yeah, this is what this is designed for. You can just be a regular person who holds the wrong opinions, and then you're targeted and you don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
And
then what are the downstream effects of that?
It's not just social media though, too. It's like people Uber, Airbnb, PayPal. Like it's not just your speech stuff. It's like those conveniences in life that are in the
But they're not just
space,
conveniences anymore because they're integrated into everything that we do. Imagine how many people would be totally screwed if they didn't have access to Venmo, for example.
I don't have access to Venmo.
You're screwed.
I could probably go make a new one, but Venmo is owned by PayPal, and I got banned from PayPal.
Right. I mean,
that's why you just pay me
it's all a web. It's all a web.
So that's why I tripled down in crypto, right? It's like pretty obvious there.
So the next part I wanted to get into was I want to get this FBI director's bit here as they talk about it. So we kind of got into it, then we paused. Let's go back to that for just a minute here, Kyle, and let's run through this for another about a minute into the FBI director's comments.
Republicans have killed the latest effort to reauthorize it, defying House Speaker Mike Johnson and obeying Trump. His marching orders on Truth Social, quote, kill FISA. It was illegally used against me and many others. They spied
he's not
on
doing
my
it right.
campaign,
Kill
end quote. That is
he's
false,
not doing
of
it
course. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But in the meantime, CNN's Lauren Fox is up on Capitol Hill for us. Lauren, does this create more headaches for House Speaker Mike Johnson? I think I know the answer to that. And does this episode raise the question, who's in charge up on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, if it's a day that ends in Y, there's some chaos happening, especially in the House of Representatives, Jim. And you are highlighting one of the biggest issues for Mike Johnson right now, which is this slim majority that he has, which means every single vote, even the procedural ones like we saw yesterday on the House floor, are very difficult to get across the finish line. Now, there were 19 Republicans who voted against advancing this legislation yesterday. It wasn't just one or two. It wasn't just a matter of twisting one or two arms. It is very clearly a problem within his conference. Now, we are getting new reporting this morning that Mike Johnson is optimistic that they can go back to the House Rules Committee, try to rework this process, restructure it in order to quell some of the conservative concerns that we saw demonstrated on the floor yesterday. It's still unclear, however, whether or not that will happen today, whether that would actually resolve the issues that have been underlying since December when leaders had to pull this bill before Christmas. And I think that there's a lot of question right now, given the fact that there's an April 19th deadline and the Senate still has to act on whatever the House does, that this is potentially heading into a situation where this may not get done ahead of the deadline. Meanwhile, there are a number of Republicans who are deeply frustrated.
So that's kind of how it's being covered broadly. And of course, what you'll see is they then get into this and it says, this is how it works. Now compare this. It says, allows U.S. citizens to collect communications of non-Americans overseas. Must be U.S.-based platforms, does not require a warrant, expires generally. Like, that's what they think you need to know. Now let's jump over to Edward Snowden and how he says this actually works. This is from 2013.
Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector anywhere. Where those communications will be picked up depends on the range of the sensor networks and the authorities that that analyst is empowered with. Not all analysts have the ability to target everything, but I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
One of the extraordinary parts about...
So that's the thing that, we knew in 2013 and then discovered in 2016.
Yeah.
Got a personal email. You're an NSA agent. They suck up everything. And then after they've sucked everything up, then they say, oh, here's the controls. And
recently, didn't they change that to where now they just buy the data from private data brokers?
That was one of the things that Speaker Johnson voted for and is now fighting, right? Which was called the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act, which specifically forbade that sort of phenomena. But it's one of those things that, he's also flipped on Ukraine spending and all these things since he got brought into the skiff. And we just wonder what was in the skiff.
What's in the skiff?
Obviously some nipple clamps and a car battery, if you ask me.
And so, and like people ask, like, how broad is this spying? There's no doubt about it. Like he said, hundreds of thousands of uses by the FBI. We know there are millions, according to some reporting, millions of searches of Americans last year, according to the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal.
I think there's an important point, and there's kind of an interesting theme that exists in here. Is there's a lot of things that we don't really know are happening until we find out about them, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of like speculation on what these people were going, and then we find out, oh yeah, that's what happened, right?
Right.
And there's a process that exists there until we actually understand the truth of the matter on these things, right?
So there was some reforms that happened after the Snowden leaks and all that kind of stuff, although he is still a wanted man.
He's just derping on Twitter with the crypto people right now. He's a fun guy on Twitter.
But like but we know that Stellar Wind and Prism and all these programs probably still exist. We know they're sucking up all this data. They didn't take down these data centers. They're still there. We know the fusion centers are still there. We probably have some constraint on phone calls because of the USA Freedom Act. But other than that, it's largely continues exactly as he says it, but probably better with the introduction of AI and large language models. And then as we talk about Tucker Carlson having his Signal chat, obviously being spied upon. The scale you can get to once you have a LLM is way bigger. Like you don't have to get to just that. And lastly, even if they can do that 3 degrees of separation question, anyone can get chart from 3 degrees of separation. Like you're 5 degrees from Kevin Bacon, like everyone is, right?
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at how they can interpret using a secret court to justify their own programs, Stellar Wind and Prism exist today, probably because of a court case called, what was it called? It literally doesn't have a name. It just says secret case, blah, 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 blah. Because of the FISA. Because of FISA is the one making the decision. They have their own appeals court that confirmed that they can do this. They can collect this mass data and that isn't spying, right? So what the fine line here is dividing the line between, is it okay to collect our data and then afterwards justify it to try to find these connections, and that's when the spying happens after the fact, when you have an actual analyst sitting there looking at it, or do they need to get a warrant before they can collect your data?
That one.
That's the question.
I
totally agree. Now, just before we get done with it, Marjorie Taylor Greene has filed, as of yesterday, filed a motion to vacate Speaker Johnson as Speaker.
Wow.
This morning, a rules vote came up, and that hasn't been acted on yet, but that's also there. So that's how big of a deal this is for the Freedom Caucus. She's not part of it. She got kicked out of it. But anyway, long story short. Then today, a new rule passed that allowed for a vote on the warrants, and it failed with a tie vote, with the Speaker voting against.
Wow.
Yeah. So is the caucus going to be held together? Is that going to be enough to appease the Freedom Caucus that they got the vote they wanted? Or is it, or because he voted against it, now that he's been to the skiff, are they going to rebel? That's what we don't know.
Jeez.
And
politics
lastly,
is dirty, man.
Maybe none of this is even worth it anyways, because we now know that we can just, if we can't do it, we could just have one of the other 5I or 7I agencies do it, which is what we know happened with the Steele dossier.
It's not very optimistic. It's not looking good for us, really.
Well, what does help is people waking up to it. The more people who understand this and can navigate this issue and put pressure on Congress to do this, in Montana, for example, I'm very confident. I haven't seen the votes yet, but I'll bet money that Matt Rosendale voted for warrants and Zinke probably voted against. So people who know that can give them a call, right? That pressure does matter. Right. But people just have to be energized enough by it that people make a difference and they actually, speak up.
Yeah.
Share this episode, share this short, share whatever, so that people get the information out. And that'll make the difference. We're at that stage. No, we're not at the stage where people can actually make real reform because not enough people care.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Well, and probably because not very many people think that they're the target, right? Mm-hmm. It's always, the other, right? Mm-hmm. The person who's more extreme than me. It's that they came for the whoever and I did nothing phenomenon, right? Like, until it's you, do you care? Mm-hmm. Well, here's why you should.
They're coming for Brazil right now.
They're coming for Elon in Brazil.
Well, yeah. And I think there's an interesting theme on this episode because I think that as we dive into this X versus Brazil dynamic that's happening, we'll see that these common trends from all of our previous stories are all existing here too. It's kind of what I was getting at with it's a little bit more naked in these other countries, where we kind of like masqueraded a lot more here in America.
We keep the court secret.
Yeah.
And they just have it a public court.
Well, that would be way better, to be honest. Like, then we could actually
Yeah, which one's actually which one's actually better?
Who's more civilized? I'm not sure.
Well, so what's going on here in with the whole Brazil versus Elon dynamic is that X, formerly known as Twitter, has been forced by court decisions to block certain popular accounts in Brazil and is prohibited from giving details of the order. Like, that's the interesting thing. Not only are they supposed to block certain accounts, they're prohibited to tell people about it. And that was actually another dynamic with that too, was is that X doesn't get told why that they're supposed to ban these people either. So like, they're not allowed to talk about it. So there's like a vow of secrecy that exists there. Elon said that it would lead to a total loss of revenue and would force X to shut down their Brazilian offices. And yeah, they were just not made aware of why they're shutting down the accounts. So you have these, there's an important thing here is you have this character here. His name is Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes. And he ordered massive fines on X. It's about $20,000 per day if X doesn't comply, and threatened to arrest all Brazilian X employees.
Oh, wow.
This same judge, he's actually a major figure in Brazil. He ordered an investigation into Telegram last year because Telegram was involved in a campaign criticizing an internet regulation bill. And what that bill was supposed to do was put the onus on social media companies to report illegal activity, and it would put these fines on if they failed to do so. So like any illegal activities that might be conducted through their service, the onus is on the social media company. So like, people are having clandestine talks in a Facebook Messenger chat or something like that. That's Facebook's problem.
Basically, they're saying it's now your job to spy on your own users.
Yes, exactly. And you have to build the systems to do that, right?
Yeah.
So he's been a part of this for a while. Basically, since October 2022, Moraes has had unilateral authority to order the removal of any online content, and it's granted by the Superior Electoral Court, which is the highest body on like elections in Brazil. They're like the ones that put all the election stuff in place.
That's a curious court to be administrating.
And he's the president of that court.
So he took the power for himself, pretty much. That's what you're saying.
So what happened in Brazil is they moved all of the election processes out of the executive branch and into the judicial branch. So now, like, elections are a judicial phenomenon, essentially.
Who did that?
Part of the Constitution.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. This has been around for decades.
That's the way it's just always been.
Yeah, this has been around since like the 50s, but like it's been steadily gaining more and more power towards this office, which this guy resides and is the president over. Right?
I see.
So, and strangely, actually, so what happened in Brazil in this last week was Schellenberger, like the best journalist in the world.
Best journalist in the world.
He was brought in to talk about Twitter Files Brazil to their Congress, their parliament, basically. And something that came out in here was that apparently this office invited the American FBI in to influence. That was the word that was used, influence, like at least in the translations, to influence and kind of have like an advisory role in Brazilian elections in the last presidential election.
Very curious.
Very curious.
Well, because and this is something that's
not the role that the FBI is supposed to have in American elections, to be clear.
But apparently that's the advisory role they have in Brazilian elections.
Oh,
interesting.
They've got that on their resume, apparently. Okay, I'm curious though about that because the former president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, was sort of viewed, I think, as sort of the analog to Trump in a lot of ways, and was, I think, during this last election that he lost to his sort of leftist counterpart, who is now the president, was sort of demonized and vilified as sort of this fascist figure who, you know, was leading the country in all these bad ways. And I'm not an expert on Brazilian politics by any stretch, but it does.
I am. Just an expert on BBLs.
Just BBLs for now.
So I actually have an interesting
enthusiast, really. Let's just put it that way. But I do want to say, like, it seems like this government is allowing for, at least allowing for, if not enabling, much more sort of, you know, I don't know, I want to say authoritarian things to occur, particularly regarding this sort of like governmental control over private companies, than I think Bolsonaro may have or obviously did during his presidency.
So this is the interesting thing. So I have a buddy down in Sao Paulo, like Brazilian, born and raised, came up to school in America. So, and I keep tabs on him every now and then. I haven't talked to him in a while. I should reach out to him. But when the Bolsonaro stuff was originally happening back in like 2017, this stuff, he reached out to me and was like, hey, is anybody in American politics talking about this? And then he sent me down this deep rabbit hole into Brazilian politics during that time. So like about 6 to 8 years ago, I was like really looking into all this stuff at that time and it was interesting because nobody was talking about it at the time. It was like, this is like the post-Trump election era. Right. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, everybody in America started talking about it. It was like, as this election was rolling on. So like, he was like a nobody in American purview. And then all of a sudden, right-wing fascist takeover of Brazil. And it was interesting because I had spent like 2 years getting Portuguese articles that I was running through Google Translate from my buddy in Brazil and like reading about this guy. And it was just very interesting to hear how the American media was talking about it versus what I was being sent from Brazil. Right?
What were the differences?
Everything that you would expect from everything you heard about Milei in Argentina, everything you hear about Bukele in Argentina, and how the corporate entities talk, or sorry, not in El Salvador, how the corporate entities talk about it versus what the people on the ground are actually talking about. Like same dynamic and same playbook. It's like everything that happened to Trump, like also happened to, it's interesting.
The parallels are pretty significant.
Yes. He's a radical right winger about to change our society in unrecognizable ways.
Fascist.
Well, and you might be able to argue that there's some fascistic elements in here because, like, again, they have a very different system than us. So why he rose to prominence is because just decades of blatant corruption. There was this Bolsonaro.
Okay.
Because there was this thing called Operation Car Wash. And so he was the like justice minister at the time. I think that's what their title would be, like English translation. And he was basically going out and clearing out all these like money laundering operations that politicians, businessmen, et cetera, they were like all funneling money through this little car wash business, like this small car wash business. And there's like just this massive scandal that's involved with like hundreds of major figures across Brazil. And Lula, the current sitting president,
da Silva, right?
Yeah.
Was one of those people, and he got charged and got jail time for his conduct during
the current president of Brazil,
who was also the former president of Brazil,
was caught up in this corruption scandal with this car wash.
He got sentenced like 500 days in prison, but then afterwards, after he kind of like served his time, Bolsonaro was still pretty widely popular at the time, but Lula was also very popular. By court order, they rescinded and nullified his sentence so he could run for president again.
Really?
And now he's the current sitting president. He beat Bolsonaro.
Who's they that rescinded
the courts?
The election court?
Yeah, because all this is like incestuous and corrupt.
The election court that's now...
No, not that. It was just like general judicial practices. Like they went through and nullified the thing and all this stuff, right? But you start to see how like it's very like mob-like. It's very like
seems like some shit that would go on here.
Because Lula was caught. His administration was caught when he was president He was president for like a decade, back from like 2002 to like 2010, something like that. He was caught. His administration was caught bribing parliament members for votes, like with actual money.
Just overtly.
Yeah, just
here's an envelope of cash.
Them, right? I mean, we do that with sex tapes, not money. I mean, we're civilized.
We're civilized, right?
It's pinky out corruption.
We take them into the skiff.
Right. Skiff time.
Or Epstein's Island.
Also, nipple clamps at Epstein's Island for sure.
But different kind.
But so you can kind of start to see the dynamics that exist here with Brazilian politics, where you have like the guy Lula from the Workers' Party, Socialist Party, right, and then you have this kind of like upstart like right-wing populist figure who got stabbed on the campaign trail by a member of the Socialist Party, but right, he said he was on a mission from God. Right,
dude, Blues Brothers quote.
I was gonna say, was he the third Blues Brother?
Sick.
So, and then how that comes into here right now. So like these are the dynamics of politics in Brazil. So what this Judge Moraes guy is saying is that he's ordered an investigation on digital militias. That is the way that he describes it, which I hope to be called a digital militiaman.
Come join our Discord. Join the digital militia.
We should adopt that right now.
Oh,
in
man.
fact, all in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Unanimous vote. We are now referred to as the digital militia. In fact, maybe we'll just rename the show that.
So, and he's accusing the digital militiamen of just, remember all the words that are used in American discourse, right?
Yes.
Accused of spreading fake news and hate messages.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
He alleges that they helped aid Bolsonaro in an alleged coup.
Oh. Heard that before.
Yeah.
Right.
He lost an election. That's the same thing as a coup. Yeah, right.
Well, and granted, Bolsonaro has a lot of military support.
Yeah.
And this is part of how he went around and jailed all these corrupt people that were caught up in this investigation, right?
Sounds like some QAnon
So there
shit.
is like some military order type of stuff that's going on here, right?
Also, there were legitimate criticisms of Bolsonaro by like Glenn Greenwald, stuff like that, of his various different civil liberties violations while he was the president. But
and again, like Kyle
doesn't
alluded
justify
to,
any of this.
Well, like Kyle alluded to, you could say the same thing about Bukele right now, who's like kind of sweeping perhaps innocent people into jail because they're affiliated with people who are, cartel linked or, committing crimes and stuff like that. So like, it is a double-edged sword.
To me, his real crime is he's not playing ball with the international like intelligence apparatus
and the IMF
and the IMF,
all that stuff.
And I'm saying for like all of these figures,
sure,
like they're not playing ball with the current regime that kind of exists in making South America what it is.
But the difference between then, because like this has always kind of been a problem, right? Like with the CIA going in and like fomenting rebellions and overthrowing democratically elected leaders in South America. The difference now is that we have the internet to expose it to the people who can now see it happening in real time and understand like that's actually what's going on potentially when those things happen.
No, I just wanted to, so digital militias, what else were they define those as? Make sure to come back around to that because we didn't let you finish. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So kind of bringing it back into Twitter here for this is this Moraes quote, and he's talking about Elon specifically here, is we cannot live in a society in which billionaires domiciled abroad have control of social networks and put themselves in a position to violate the rule of law. So that is what he is saying Twitter is doing right now, because part of the rule of law here is one, he has like absolute authority to get rid of content online that
he doesn't like, including
online.
Stuff that just criticizes him, which is very interesting. It's like he has a big head. He's like deleted from the internet.
so there's an interesting dynamic. Some interesting dynamics here is Starlink is going to provide free internet for schools in Brazil if the government doesn't honor their contract. And Elon says 100%, so Starlink playing a role in a lot of things right now.
I really like how it's Dogecoin designer.
Yeah.
Is the one who
he's just quoting something that Elon said directly, which he did say.
But Dogecoin designer, him and Elon go back and forth a lot.
That's funny.
So Elon says we're lifting all restrictions. This judge has applied massive fines, threatened to arrest our employees and cut off access to X in Brazil. As a result, we will probably lose all revenue in Brazil and have to shut down our offices there. But principles matter more than profits. VPN downloads skyrocketing in Brazil. NordVPN said that they saw a 7x download of their product in Brazil. So a lot of people VPNs are a very important tool for people to just get around geo-blocking in various countries.
People will be using those ostensibly to access X because it will be blocked within their geographic zone.
Yeah. Something I should say is too, when I was talking about my buddy in Brazil sending me all this stuff, when all of this corruption scandal was going on with Operation Car Wash, when Bolsonaro was the justice minister, he was sending me when he was going to these protests. There was protesters of 25 million people in Sao Paulo, 21 million people in Rio de Janeiro, just blocking all the streets. Like when we're talking, it's not just like a small thing that was going on. It was massive at this time. Like this was a revolutionary moment in Brazilian politics when Bolsonaro and Operation Car Wash was happening and all this stuff, right?
And the protests were in support of arresting the corruption individuals?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like going against the system and the corruption in their government. It also was coming off of, there was a bunch of stuff with like rail lines and corruption with like corporatism that was going on. There was stuff with like the World Cup, so football, soccer, Das American soccer. the true name.
Accurate.
There was stuff going on with the Olympics. I remembered my buddy sending me pictures of like they have like where the Olympics were being held, and then there was like this massive homeless problem that was happening, and they just put up a wall to block the view.
Don't look at that. Right? Stop noticing.
Yes, like those types of stuff were going on, and it had the population of Brazil just in an uproar because of it, right?
Yeah. So that's always the case with the Olympics, though, right? I mean, that's not unique to Brazil. Yeah. It's always like, hey, yeah, we're gonna host the Olympics in Beijing, but we're not going to allow you to drive your cars for a month ahead of time, so the smog clears up, so the rest of the world doesn't see how shitty our pollution problems are.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too, where
or if the Chinese prime minister comes to San Francisco.
Yeah, you just cleanse all the homeless people up.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have like if one of these things was happening at once, but all of these things kind of happened within like a 3-year period.
Yeah.
Right? And then it's just like all those boil up, and then all of a sudden 25 million protesters in Sao Paulo.
Yeah.
Right. You also have so Brazilian leftist groups want to fine Musk $200 million for comments about the judge. Elon is facing more attacks in Brazil by far left organizations simply by defending free speech rights for the Brazilian people. One of the things that I found was interesting was the name of this NGO was Inspection and Control Institute.
See, if it was America, it would be the Democracy and Freedom Institute for Freedom and Democracy. When it said they're just like, nah, we're going to be straight up. It's the Inspection and Control Institute. That's what we do.
I had the best words.
I need that on a t-shirt. The Freedom and Democracy Institute for Freedom and Democracy. I need that shit on a t-shirt. ASAP.
That little CIA logo below it. Like,
that's beautiful.
But this is what I mean by like, a lot of these things are just a lot more naked.
Totally.
Where we just masquerade all this
they're
stuff.
They're seeking urgent compensation from like...
They have a structured settlement and they need cash now.
Wow.
Wow, what a pull.
Wow, that's nice.
Oh, God.
So what does this all mean? Let's ask my favorite bald on the internet. My favorite fellow...
Joe Rogan? Jocko.
Second favorite. Third favorite bald on the...
Yeah, so Mike...
I don't know if he does jiu-jitsu, so I can't say.
You gotta rank him on a very objective set of standards.
Yeah, we need like an ABC.
Why don't you work on that for us? Like David's top 10 balds on the internet, ranked. That'll be a really hot list.
Yeah, you got it.
Johnny Sins.
It might be top 5. Might be B tier.
Does Johnny Sins have a BBL?
I don't think he needs one.
Oh, okay.
I'm not well studied enough. So Mike Benz, who does a lot of good work when it comes to like freedom and information online and kind of understanding the dynamics of different intelligence operations, geopolitically speaking, he has some interesting thoughts on the role that the American State Department might be having in this, and almost using as Brazil as a kind of a proxy in a fight against Elon, which is interesting when we're thinking about a book that we talk about here often is The Sovereign Individual, which one of the hypotheses here is that you have these individual figures that are rising to be on par with like the logic of control of these state apparatuses. Like in a sense, some of these like individual forces and like the backbones behind them are becoming almost like their own sovereign entities that can compete with sovereign nations, right? And these people are problematic, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about this, the State Department might be using Brazil almost in a proxy, like as a war against Elon in this way. This is the hypothesis that Mike Benz is kind of laying out here, and let's kind of go through this a little bit.
Yeah.
Hey, in this vid, I want to talk about what the State Department would normally do when a country like Brazil would attack a U.S. multinational tech company. So I don't see this Brazil censorship situation as being a Brazil situation. I see this being the U.S. State Department. I see this being the U.S. foreign policy establishment. I see this being the U.S. blob operating through Brazil as a proxy and supporting behind the scenes what Brazil is doing with the censorship actions that are now forcing X out of the country. So let me break down what I mean here. So the blob fears populism. Okay, the U.S. foreign policy establishment fears the rise of domestic populist groups in the U.S. and around the world, in NATO countries and in BRICS countries, like Brazil, BRICS. So here's what's happening here. A couple of years ago, I wrote a report, which I was very shocked to discover at the time. I should say I was shocked at the extent of it. But basically, it turned out that when I was looking into what was behind censorship in Brazil, it turned out that what was driving it appeared to be a gaggle of U.S. State Department-funded NGOs. And not just State Department-funded NGOs, but they were actually National Endowment for Democracy funded as well. You had USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy funding a bunch of domestic censorship groups in Brazil. This actually goes right back to the beginning of Bolsonaro's tenure in 2019. In June 2019, the Atlantic Council convened a meeting about what to do about the rise of disinformation in Brazil that was pro-Bolsonaro in nature. And the Atlantic Council's panel, called Election Watch in June 2019, bemoaned the fact that in Brazil, people were paying more attention to their own friends, family, and clergy than they were to institutions, global institutions, such as the Atlantic Council, which is a CIA pass-through. It has 7 CIA directors on its board. It's annually funded every year by the Pentagon, the State Department, and the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA cutout. Now, in addition to that, a bunch of these university centers in Brazil and civil society groups get National Endowment for Democracy funding. That is a CIA pass-through. So this is the CIA and State Department and USAID directly funding, in June 2019, the censorship apparatus in Brazil against pro-Bolsonaro groups. See, in 2019, social media was already censored in Brazil. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube censorship in Brazil hit them really hard, the same way that it did in the U.S. So Bolsonaro supporters switched to WhatsApp and Telegram to spread their messaging because they were basically kicked off of.
Which, remember, at that time, I was talking about Telegram. There was like a war about this electoral office, this judge with Telegram, because they were going against a bill that was putting the onus on them about illegal activity. You see where those things kind of start to connect together, right? Any other thoughts before we
send it
off of Facebook? This is why one of the biggest audiences for Gab, one of the first free speech sort of alternative platform attempts, was the Brazilian population in 2018, 2019. Because they were hit with that first wave of censorship hard. So what the Atlantic Council and a bunch of these other National Endowment for Democracy funded CIA proxies did is they then descended on WhatsApp and Telegram. And they promoted these little organs, these little activists, these little proxies within Brazil to put pressure on the Brazilian government to take out WhatsApp and Telegram until WhatsApp and Telegram also censored populist supporters, right-wing populist nationalist Bolsonaro supporters. And so that led to WhatsApp putting caps on the amount of messages that could be forwarded. And it led to them basically shutting down the ability to approximate the size of a Facebook group. They vastly reduced the amount of people who could populate a single group in order to basically balkanize pro-Bolsonaro speech. And then when Telegram refused to censor misinformation, they actually shut down Telegram in the country until it bent the knee to the government.
Okay, I have a question here. Because obviously the trend is against Bolsonaro in this case. What are the ties and associations between Bolsonaro versus Lula da Silva and BRICS, like Brazil's attachment to BRICS and Russia versus the West, right? Is da Silva more pro-Western and Bolsonaro more pro-BRICS? Is there a dynamic there that we know of?
Well, go ahead.
Well, just to frame up real quick, it's important not to understand BRICS as a military alliance.
Right, it's an economic alliance.
So,
for sure.
like, for example, India is very close to the United States.
Sure.
But
I mean, is there a component of this that is trying to keep Brazil close to the U.S. by resisting Bolsonaro if he had, particular proclivity to the pro-BRIC side versus the Western economic side?
Yeah, I think by Mike Benz's theory that the censorship industrial complex was created first to deal with the Arab Spring, then got turned on to the West because of Brexit, then Trump, that it kind of follows that it's like this Western sphere of influence, which including like the Monroe Doctrine interpretation that all of South America is just a vassal state of America. Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, I think that's the angle. Less so, does it matter what Russia and China are at on that? I don't think so. It's just about what they hold and don't feel like they hold.
Well, and especially if you think about these types, maybe not so much Milei, but if you think about like guys like Bukele and then also guys like Bolsonaro, there's a theme that exists, especially if you look at Bukele on Twitter. He's very critical of the Western kind of intelligence apparatus, and like very much being like, hey, we found out that the CIA was doing this in El Salvador, like those types of things. And Bolsonaro is very much where there's like this internationalism versus nationalism thread that exists there. And I think part of that is similar to Brexit, where you have the EU, you have the European Union, and the British were kind of sick of having to like pay their vassal fee to the EU, and they wanted to have like some bit of identity to themselves, politically, sovereignty, all this stuff,
economically,
all the E's, and like I think Brazil's kind of in that same boat where they don't want to just be a vassal state. They also want to have some of their own national ideas. It doesn't mean that they want to like completely cut off trade with the rest of the world or something like that, but they also want to have some sort of identity in themselves, right?
Well, and also have the freedom to enact policies that are actually pro Brazil versus just pro like global order.
Versus pro Western hemisphere.
Which when I frame it as Western versus BRICS, perhaps it's a better distinction to make it nationalist versus globalist, right? Like they want autonomy and independence and the ability to make decisions that are better for them than are just better for whatever the prevailing global elite want.
Or even more accurate, be like American empire, hegemony versus a multi-plural world where sovereign countries are able to pursue their own interests as long as they're not violent with each other.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. And oftentimes I think the conversation gets muddied with these words like nationalism or globalism, or even...
Because nationalism is so tied up in militarism, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. But we've kind of associated it so tightly with it because of World War I and World War II.
Well, and also things like globalism, like the libertarians always have like a conniption fit over the word globalism because there's like, it means trade, but like that's not actually what everybody else is using the word for. Right. Like George Soros wrote a book called On Globalism, and I've read the book. It's not what the Koch brothers are talking about with globalism. They're both using the term in very different ways.
So how does Soros define it?
To Soros, it's much more like, it's much more like what you talked about there, where it's like the hegemonic order and being able to kind of control systems, and it's kind of like, to him, it's like a global. It's been 10 years since I read the book. It's like a global. The way I would describe it, maybe this is me being kind of negative connotations on it, it's like a global fascism. That's like what it is.
Sure. Like he would frame it like the coming together of a global society to be more tolerant and to accept gay people and to be more democratic and more focused on social justice and all these ways that. If you look at the neoconservatives, neocons kind of a similar project in that we're going to create democracies and we're going to make all those democracies like respect individual human rights in the way that the West conceives of them. And then we're going to push them all so that we all get healthier, wealthier, and more equal over time, right? That's the vision of both the neoliberals and the neoconservatives in a sense. The neoconservatives just frame it in a sense of like, that will make America safer. And the neoliberals say that will make us all better and more off and more equal.
More equitable.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So those
everybody's
two sides
putting their moral framework embedded into it, and
it's
if the entire world had my moral framework,
as opposed to actual pluralism and tolerance, which says that Brazil should be able to pursue Brazil's national identity and unity and goals according to popular sovereignty ideals. That says that, hey, what they would choose for themselves is just fine as long as they're not aggressing against their neighbors. Great. Like that's the international view of it. Now you could have other views of it. You could say, hey, this is a bad idea. Bolsonaro had all kinds of bad ideas that were justifications of his anti-globalism that maybe were bad, right? But that's their ideas. It's not my goddamn business. I'm an American, right? Yeah. And that's not the way, but that's not the way the world works.
Yeah.
The world works that the intelligence state, the blob, has to have an opinion on everything. It has to be in control of everything because they see it as if we're not in control of everything, we're no longer the hegemony. And we can't lose that because that's what keeps us safe and empowers us and gives us all of our black budgets.
And that's what keeps the US dollar as the reserve currency and what keeps our economy afloat, because if we weren't that right now, given the debt load that we have, we'd be in a very different economic situation.
Perhaps. Yeah.
I would say.
Well, and part of the global economic order is to homogenize everything together. There's a lot of lip service to things like diversity is our strength and all this stuff. But what it seems to be happening in practice is that we're just like homogenizing everything, which is not necessarily pluralism. Like we're just blending cultures together for the sake of, and then we're like ripping out the the interesting things about all these cultures, because we're all actually just becoming one unified culture.
Right.
But then we give lip service like diversity is our strength. Yeah. That's not exactly what's happening.
Well, it's diversity how you look, not diversity how you think. Diversity of ethnic origin, but not diversity of actual point of view. And that's just one of those, like, everything becomes, that's that cosmopolitanism argument, right? That's like that. There are cultures that evolve out of cosmopolitan context. They're very regionally specific, right, and very culturally specific to their area. But that often requires like a self-identity that persists over time. And what they are kind of pushing against is this idea that Sao Paulo, Brazil, will look exactly like London or New York or these other sorts of things in the certain echelons of the upper class, right? And when those things start to filter down and look more like everything else, everywhere else in the world, a lot of people push back and they say, hey, that's not who we are. We're a different sort of person.
What's the value of every place looking the same as every other place in the world?
Part of it, the question is whether or not to me, it's a question whether or not it happens organically because of the free choices of individuals boiling up, or does it happen because U.S. hegemony requires it? And the way that the global investment cartel that can control things with the blob can make money off of it is requiring it, then I'm more concerned, right? Then I'm more like, oh, this is an imposed order by those people trying to maintain their power, rather than people saying, hey, my grandparents came from the farm. I moved to this city, or my parents came from the city. My parents were laborers. Now I'm an intellectual, and I do share some values with this person from China or New York or London or whatever. And that's what I freely have evolved. That's you got there because of a set of human steps that no one is imposing on anybody. Yeah. Fine, okay, that's the sense of globalism, which I get. The one that says, hey, you got to do this, you got to implement these reforms on transgenderism, otherwise you can't get a World Bank loan, then I'm like, well, no, that's kind of like, that's a whole different thing, right? Does that make sense?
Well, but I think like the things that we've looked at in this episode would suggest that what's boiling up from the public is that, no, we're not like everyone else, right? Like the people in Brazil are having this populist uprising because they're resisting those kind of machinations.
And the degree to which I wonder to the degree to which the corruption is the dominant factor, or it's the global like loss of national identity. Are they kind of jadedly using one to attack the other, and it's kind of an in versus means calculation? I don't know. I can't. I
think it's just multiple variables. Like we try to get too reductionist on being like, well, this is much more.
What's the real
than
cause?
That thing. And really, it's just there's a lot of variables at play, and these are all kind of different ways that people are describing it and they're acting on it.
Right.
And that, in the end of the day, is like it's not one thing or the other. Like, there's just a lot of variables that go into all the decision making and the global trends that are happening.
So you could have total red herrings that aren't true, that are kind of like the meme of why it happens, right? It's like the meme magic of it. For example, the bowling alone phenomena that is just because of trade, because we've decided it is, right?
What's the bowling alone?
Oh, the bowling alone is that we're all isolated individuals because of global trade. This is a major driving theory of Trumpism and the skepticism and the support of industrial planning for national identity, right? Which is this idea that because of NAFTA and because of trade with China, all the jobs have been shipped overseas, which is probably false, right? And like that idea, it was probably those jobs were lost because of automation and because of all kinds of many different phenomena. Almost none of it was that. And if it was that, it's probably because of the rise of the regulatory state in America, not because of China's being devious and dastardly.
So it's more to the effect of that it's becoming less economically viable to do business in America, therefore you're moving overseas for those reasons.
Or your job gets replaced by a robot.
Sure.
Yeah. Because labor is expensive.
And part of what I'm saying is like, that's probably one major variable of it, but there's also probably other variables that exist. Like there's cultural problems that end up that are intangibles that you might calculate, and that causes different psychological problems within a population. And like, and those things are much more intangible, right? But like the bowling alone idea and kind of like the critiques of it, all those types of things, like those are very easy. Like you can put data points and, so it's like economists can kind of nerd out about that thing, but like it is much more difficult to see the broader thoughts,
which is like hillbillyology and those sorts of studies, which are basically looking at like how did these communities across the American East, rural communities basically fall apart from where they were at. They've always been the poorest communities, but they became even poorer as everyone else got richer. Why? Right? Some people will look at that. They'll look at all of the anecdote out of that. They'll look at all the human experience out of that, and they'll just connect it with like a question mark trade policy. right? And then that becomes the meme, which becomes way stronger than the economic argument. They need the left brainism, because it's just like there is people who are being left behind that we feel, and this guy's saying he's going to do something about it, and he has some explanation that seems tenable, so I'm going to put my support behind it. Whether it's Bolsonaro or Trump or whoever, that's just the phenomena of it. And it relies specifically, the nationalism it relies specifically of, we should serve first the people in our country, not the global order of the world hegemony of America.
Seems reasonable.
Well, right? Which that's the sense in which we actually mean nationalism in this case, which is totally supportable, which I totally understand. But there's a difference between that and saying, oh, I need a big parade to celebrate how great we are, right? There's a difference between like the nationalism that's kind of like crude, or
the propagandistic nationalism.
Yeah,
right?
There's a difference there.
Yeah, and there's a different vibe, because and this is actually where the problem, where I think a lot of like nationalistic countries end up going, where a lot of the nationalism starts to become like force fed, and it's not like a natural, binding to a collective. Like there is a binding to collective that I think is good, but the problem is when it becomes like very fiat. It becomes like very fake and orchestrated by the top down, rather than like the emergent phenomenon, right?
Right.
And like that's where, and that's actually something that's like an area that I think libertarians could be better at. Like this was something that Jeff Dice got in a lot of trouble several years back for talking about people actually care about blood and soil. And then there was all like there was all the people.
What is that?
You can't say blood and soil.
Yeah. Because blood and soil gets, that's attributed to nationalism, which is attributed to Hitler, which is attributed to, and you can't use that. But the thing is, there's like a deep psychological need that people have, which is like being part of a tribe. But like the problem that like nationalism from a that I think it has when we're talking about politics is it becomes very like top down, like drilled into your head. It's like mandatory, and that's a problem. It's like you must bow to the flag, that type of deal, rather than being like, yeah, I'm part of my tribe, and we have like a collective ethos. We have like the same moral principles that bind us together. Like that's a very different. That's like a right brain versus a left brain.
And to be fair, blood and soil was a slogan of the Nazis. Like it was a direct quote.
But what does that mean exactly? Like tribal identity and territory, like allegiance, like a chosen identity. And what you're referring to, I think, is the preference of a chosen identity versus like sort of a forced allegiance or something.
No. So in Europe, blood and soil has a longer history than Nazis. It just happens to be one of the things in the Nazis.
Sure. But what Kyle was saying was different.
It's like what Candace said in that interview in the debate with Barclay, the rabbi. Remember, it was like, you said, you invoked Hitler in the thing. But when what she was saying was nationalism doesn't necessarily have to be this dirty word, but the reason why it's a dirty word in American politics is because of Hitler. Right. So, and everybody has this connotation that exists with the word nationalism, like, which is a very like left brain. It's like, I don't like nationalism because I have all these thoughts that come out, and there's all these, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But when in reality is like the actual kind of idea of belonging to a collective that's not necessarily a dirty thing, right?
Well, especially if you look at the identity of what it means to be a German has to do with who your ancestors were and the chunk of ground you're on.
Sure.
Right? Well, the identity of being American has almost nothing to do with that. As a series of institutions that are completely disconnected from that, right? And every time people try to anchor it into identity, there's a whole bunch of contradictions spring out of that. And because we've always been a country that has been a country of immigrants, to be completely fair.
America has a completely different history than like everyone else in the world.
It's actually our biggest advantage because it's what attracts all the smart people here and is one of our biggest advantages is we're a country based on ideas, not based upon those things. So like the part of me that's like very sympathetic to the Jeff Dice point of view says, look, but I get it. My experience as a kid growing up in rural Montana was I'm a Montanan, right? And that means something. It's not just a geographic, peculiarity. It's how I say crick, not creek, right? And it's
wrong.
Weird. It's wrong. It's wrong and weird.
It's how I orientate towards architecture, right? To me, new buildings are cool, right? And like other people are like, oh, wrong. So, these sorts of cultural things and values I share with other people, right, does give me context, right? And that context to identity, that bridge between context of how you grew up and where you're from and how you say things and what your values are in your individual identity do matter. And like the the like spike the ball argument on individualism is always, oh, well, you're just not an individual. You have a context. It's like, yeah, sure, they do. The question is to what degree can you decide to be otherwise, right? To what degree can you, instead of getting that, digging a hole in the ground job like all your parents and your ancestors all did, that you got to go to school? Can you reject that? Well, that's liberalism, right? That's the individualist value. And then to what degree can you freely choose to stay on the farm? That's also an individualist value. Just even like that. This is a yin to yang phenomena, not a individualism matters. There is no such thing as a good collective. These sorts of things don't have to be in conflict if you put them in their proper context. So, and that's the best way to think about the Jeff Dice point, is that our identity has to be nested into a larger context, and we should encourage not just the individual identity formation, but also the formation of a larger identity that is our culture, that is our values as an American or as a Montanan or as a Massachusetts. Massachusetts?
Just say Masshole.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah. So,
well, in a sense too, like if we think about, like that's kind of the purpose in a sense of like the 10th Amendment in America, which is like putting things towards states' rights, and that allows for these different, because America's a big place. Like we're a gigantic country. It's really, you can't really have one singular culture in such a large geographical area. And that's actually one of the, like the 10th Amendment and putting things towards the states is like a nice political tool, right? But like there's also a cultural thing where like these states can have their own culture and put the law around it, right?
Well, it's almost like a mandate. You have to just respect the fact that exists, because you couldn't possibly, it would just be a gargantuan task to try to homogenize an entire country.
Well, and it's like,
but they've made that the attempt to do so, right? That's exactly the point, right? That's what the progressive era has done.
Wrong.
Right. It says, hey, you want to have your own welfare program? Can't. Got to do Medicaid. And if you don't qualify Medicaid standards, you're out. Sorry. And if you're gonna, you don't want to have a speed limit? Too bad. You don't get any highway funding if you don't. Those sorts of phenomena. That's the federal government's always trying to homogenize, while the states are always trying to push back for their local constituents and identities. That's what the 10th Amendment was for, right? It was to lean in the other direction and say, this is who we are. Specifically, the advantage there is that it says the goal there is anything peaceful, right? The goal there is, you can do all these extra things. You can be a Catholic state, Baltimore, within these bounds that still recognizes individual rights to this degree, this basic floor minimum that means to be a state in the union.
Yeah, because the original idea is just kind of the federal government. They just made crystal sure that people externally didn't fuck that shit up internally, right? Like that's kind of the general premise. But then everybody inside, they can kind of do their thing according to their own little boundaries. But now it's just like the federal government controls everything. And then maybe the state laws matter too sometimes.
Well, they control it with economic incentives too. Right. Like more than anything, really.
And straight up fiat, right? Like Obamacare was a straight up takeover of insurance across all the states.
Yeah.
Right. Or it was like Montana was the last state to adopt driving limits, and the kind of the major reason why, like speed limits. So it was always just reasonable and prudent. Like that was kind of the idea.
And
up until the 90s.
And open container laws.
Yeah. But
you
then
could literally drink and drive whatever speed you wanted for a long time in Montana.
But then you have the federal government that comes in. That's like, well, you're not going to get the funding for these things unless you get the stuff. And it's like, okay, we'll have speed limits. Darn you, federal government.
And to be fair,
which is your own money.
To be fair, though, highway fatalities after that point did go down substantially once they instituted a speed limit and the fact that you couldn't like crack a beer.
Is that true? You just hate America.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's right. Yes. I'm just saying the data showed that people
maybe we wanted that
more.
In those, okay.
Go f*** yourself.
We like living life on the edge.
And people in Brazil might vote wrong, Joe. What are you going to say next?
You know what? At the
State Department has to get involved in that.
No, I'm just kidding. I
played the fifth.
The idea was there was that, and there was also a floor, right? You couldn't actually be a religious dictatorship. You couldn't actually do all these things that some states might have done. Like the propensity for the state to devolve into autocracy is consistent and prevalent always, right? There's a iron law of aristocracy that will always exert itself. So one of the geniuses of the Constitution is that it says, no, you have to be a republic. Now we have to define that, but it requires that. It never requires that of the federal government, other than by implication. But it says states have to, right? And then the incorporation doctrine's created and says states have to respect individual rights to this minimum floor. Those are the right ways of thinking. Rather than just playing defense all the time, we should be playing offense. We should be advocating for returning to what it means to be a republic again. We should identify that that the state of freedom requires a set of rules around it, and we should embrace that and advocate for that to get that next step going that direction to the greatest degree possible in positive change. And that's actually how you do it. You can't do it just by objecting over and over again to FISA. You actually have to go produce something that works its way around it or reforms it.
And a lot of that requires people in general understanding what the empire has become and that we're not the same thing that we used to be. And there's been a massive governance change in how things actually operate over the last 100 years. And people are waking up to that. Like, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about the amount of people asking questions about things, right?
Noticing
and asking questions. And frankly, I mean, we're talking about the Brazil versus Twitter thing. I mean, Elon buying Twitter was a major factor in that, of like allowing a lot of these types of discourse to actually happen. And a lot of like very uncomfortable discourses are happening as well. And people are sifting through that, right? And we need to continue to foster and have more of that, and also build systems that increase the viability of having those conversations. And it's like, it feels like we're very early stages in that moment, but whatever that transitionary period is that we're kind of in right now, of people waking up to those things, it just seems like we're going to continue growing and growing and growing. Like, it feels like once we hit 2030, 2034, like that region, feels like things are going to be drastically different just with the amount of, and part of that is just generational change, right? The younger generations are waking up with way more information flow, and they have more like systems in place that allow them to sift through a lot more information that the older generations didn't have, because everything was very narrowly focused through very specific channels. So it was very difficult to question things when there was only very specific narrow channels that you could view lenses through. Mm-hmm. Now there's so many different lenses, and those lenses are competing with each other, and you have like cults and tribes coming in those fields, and they're all like competing for like for the mimetic prophecy of where this thing is going, right?
Yeah, so there's much more spontaneous bottom up, much more diverse sort of free field, and how that changes. That's also when the age of Pisces starts. So
don't read Jung's book Ion on that. It'll break your brain.
We're in the age of Aquarius right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's my time to shine, baby. Let's go.
We're in the transition period between Pisces and Aquarius.
Yeah. I said it wrong. That's what.
Yourself. Oh man, why are you so mad?
How many of those do you have?
well, we had at least 2.
There was 2. There's a long one and a shorter one.
Oh, just so you have it.
The more emphatic one.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today.
Bennett
that's all our stuff.
Bennett
Unless we want to get into
see
our
me
extra
thrive.
content.
We have a lot of. There was so much
thrive,
stuff.
Then I thrive, so I kind of do. I just don't want you to get a big hit about it.
Well, you know what? That's not your problem.
What a stupid son of a bitch.
That's right. That's been a great show, you guys.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate this conversation, and I really appreciate you guys for watching and listening wherever you are. Please do like, subscribe, leave us a review if you're listening on a podcast platform. Those reviews are huge for us. So leave us 5 stars, but then tell us how terrible we are too in the actual comment.
5-star, but tell us how we're terrible.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a great way to do it.
Exactly. And then show up in the shorts on YouTube, on TikTok, and brawl it out with the trolls in the comments. I think it's just it's pretty funny to see which clips kind of go crazy. So
the algo loves that. Actually, before we go, I wanted to correct something because I got it live. I got a message to me, is that Zinke did vote for the warrant, and then he voted against FISA renewal.
Really?
So good job, Ryan Zinke, Congressman Zinke out of Montana, representing the western half of the state. Yeah. So anyways.
Not maybe a lot of things that libertarian-minded individuals can point to with Ryan Zinke's voting record and say, yes, good job. So, hey, you got to reward the behavior you want to see more of. Mm-hmm. So thank you. We appreciate it.
Also, I guess throwing it into, because I know it was requested of me to talk about another James O'Keefe story that was going on with this like exposing and the Ethereum Foundation stuff. Before I dive into that a little bit, we might talk about it whenever part 2 of that comes out. I know that was a thing that I've had a few people request me talk about that, but I'm waiting for more information because I'm not satisfied with the information I have currently for it.
Maybe if we get to 1,000 subs on YouTube, we'll have to introduce a new Kyle monologue series about crypto.
No.
So if you want to see that, go ahead
don't make me edit that.
Share the show with your friends. Put Bennett through the ringer and make Kyle do a monologue series. Guys, for David Rand, for Kyle Mack, for Bennett on the buttons, my name's Joe Sheehan. This is Human Reaction, and we really appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Help us fight internet censorship by liking, commenting, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with your friends. To find us around the internet, visit linktree.com/humanreactionpod.